I never imagined I would become the architect of a man's complete destruction. For 7 long years after my divorce, I perfected the role of the defeated ex-wife. I stayed quiet. I stayed small. I let my ex-husband, Bradley Thompson, and his glamorous new wife, Margaret, parade their flawless life in public, while I faded deliberately into the background. I let them believe I was broken. I let them believe I was harmless. I let them believe I was nothing more than a bitter woman left behind. And I played that role so convincingly that even my own daughter believed it. My name is Jane Carson. I'm 52 years old. On paper, I'm a modest security consultant living in upstate New York, divorced, private, unremarkable. The kind of woman people look through instead of at. That was the story I allowed the world to see. The truth is far more complicated and far darker. That truth would eventually become the reason Bradley Thompson lost everything he believed made him untouchable. It all began with an envelope, cream-colored, heavy, expensive in a way that announces wealth before you even open it. The paper felt strange in my work-roughened hands as I stood in my small apartment, sunlight cutting across the worn coffee table. Gold-embossed lettering caught the light, spelling out words that made my chest tighten painfully. Emma Carson and Tyler Harrison cordially invite you to celebrate their engagement. My daughter, engaged. I stared at the invitation for a long time, my fingers trembling just enough to notice. 7 years had passed since Bradley walked out of our 20-year marriage. 7 years since he decided a younger body, a richer life, and louder admiration mattered more than the family we built together. 7 years since he took Emma with him. The memories still burned like acid behind my ribs, but I had learned how to lock pain away. Survival teaches you that. I placed the invitation on the table and went to the kitchen, reaching for something stronger than coffee. My reflection in the darkened window stared back at me, calm, composed, controlled. People see a woman who looks ordinary. They don't see what I buried. Before I became Jane Carson, the quiet ex-wife, the invisible mother, I was someone else entirely. A woman who dismantled corporate empires from the shadows. A woman who learned how power really works. That woman never truly disappeared. She just learned how to wait. The doorbell rang. I checked the security camera on my phone out of habit before opening the door. Marcus stood there, my only remaining friend from the old days, the only one who never completely let go. "You got one too," he said as he stepped inside, nodding toward the envelope. "Emma called," I replied, pouring whiskey into 2 glasses. "She said she wants me there." Marcus didn't look convinced. "Or Bradley wants to remind you exactly where you stand." "My daughter wouldn't do that to me," I said, though doubt slid quietly into my voice. Marcus sighed. "She believed his lies once. Be careful walking back into that house." After he left, I stood alone in my office and opened the concealed panel inside my closet. The safe waited exactly where I'd left it. Inside were documents, alternate passports, and a satellite phone I hadn't powered on in 15 years. I turned it on. It still worked. I dialed the only number stored in its memory. "The spider waits while the web trembles," I said when the line connected. A long pause. "Jane, is that really you?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "I may need your services again." I told myself it was just a contingency. I was lying to myself, because deep down, I already knew. The moment I walked back into Bradley Thompson's world, everything was going to burn. Before everything fractured, before silence became my armor, I was not a woman hiding in the margins of my own life. I was Jane Carson, and I believed in stability. I believed in effort, in loyalty, in the quiet power of showing up every day, even when no one was watching. I met Bradley Thompson when I was 29. I was working in corporate risk analysis back then. Sharp suits, sharper instincts, a reputation for catching problems before they exploded. Bradley was already successful, already charming in that polished, practiced way that makes people feel chosen when he smiles at them. He wasn't flashy then. That came later. At first, he was attentive, curious about my work, proud of my intelligence in public, even if privately he preferred when I softened myself. He talked about partnership, about building something lasting, about family. I wanted those things too. We married quickly, not recklessly, but confidently. Two adults who believed they knew what they were choosing. For years it worked, or at least I believed it did. We built a life that looked solid from the outside. A house in a quiet neighborhood, dinner at the table most nights, shared routines, shared plans. When Emma was born, everything else faded into the background. Motherhood grounded me in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't just competent anymore. I was necessary. Emma had my eyes and Bradley's smile. She was observant, thoughtful, endlessly curious. I taught her how to change a tire, how to read contracts, how to ask uncomfortable questions politely but firmly. Bradley taught her confidence in rooms full of powerful people. For a long time, it felt balanced. But cracks don't announce themselves. They whisper. Bradley started working later, traveling more. He began caring deeply about things he once dismissed. Status, recognition, admiration from people who didn't know him when he was ordinary. I noticed. I always noticed. I asked questions. Calm ones, rational ones, the kind that don't accuse but invite honesty. Bradley answered them smoothly, too smoothly. By the time Margaret entered our orbit, I was already being edged out of my own marriage. She was younger, radiant, eager in a way that made Bradley feel powerful again. She admired him openly, needed him visibly. I was his equal. That was the difference. The divorce was swift and clinical. No screaming, no dramatic confession, just paperwork and quiet cruelty. Bradley framed it as a mutual decision. Margaret moved in before the ink was dry. Emma was 18, old enough to choose, young enough to be manipulated. Bradley told her I was unstable, dangerous, that my past work made me someone to fear. Margaret reinforced it gently, convincingly. I watched my daughter pull away inch by inch, visit by visit, until the distance became permanent. I let it happen because I believed staying quiet would protect her. 7 years passed. I downsized, changed careers, changed names in places where names mattered. I became invisible by design. Bradley and Margaret rose socially. Wealth, galas, connections. Their life became louder as mine became small. Emma stopped calling until the invitation arrived. And suddenly, every compromise I had made in the name of peace felt like a mistake I could no longer afford. Because walking back into that world wasn't just about attending an engagement party. It was about confronting the lie I had allowed to define me and the people who benefited most from it. The closer the engagement party drew, the heavier the silence around me became. It wasn't the kind of silence that feels peaceful. It was dense, pressurized, like the air before a storm that everyone pretends isn't coming. Emma and I spoke twice before the party. Short calls, careful words. She asked how I was doing. I asked about the wedding plans. We avoided everything real with surgical precision. She never said, "I miss you." I never said, "Why did you leave?" Every conversation ended politely, safely. Incomplete. That was the first sign I should have listened to more closely. The second sign came from Marcus. "You're walking into a trap," he said the night before the event, sitting across from me as I packed the only formal dress I still owned. Bradley doesn't invite ghosts back into the room unless he plans to use them. He didn't invite me, I replied. Emma did. Marcus watched me carefully. That doesn't mean Bradley doesn't control the room. He was right. He usually was. Bradley controlled environments the way other people controlled conversations, subtly, invisibly, but absolutely. He surrounded himself with people who echoed him, depended on him, admired him. Anyone who didn't fit that pattern eventually disappeared, including me. The third sign came the moment I arrived at the Thompson estate. The scale of it was obscene. 5 acres of manicured perfection. Private security, valets who didn't bother hiding their judgment when they saw my 10-year-old sedan. I felt it immediately, That old, familiar pressure. The unspoken hierarchy. Who mattered? Who didn't? I straightened my posture anyway. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with excess. Crystal chandeliers, politicians, CEOs, minor celebrities, all orbiting Bradley like he was gravity itself. And then I saw Margaret. She looked flawless in the way only someone deeply practiced in self-presentation can. Every detail curated, every movement intentional. She laughed easily, but her eyes gave her away. She was tense. Margaret always got tense when something wasn't fully under her control. That was the fourth sign. The fifth came from Sarah, one of Emma's college friends. She's happy, Sarah said carefully when I asked about my daughter. But she's changed. How? I asked. Sarah hesitated. She watches herself all the time, like she's afraid of saying the wrong thing in the wrong room. That hurt more than I expected, because that wasn't how I raised her. Then I saw Emma, and everything else faded. She looked older, stronger, still unmistakably my daughter. Her engagement ring caught the light, and for a brief moment, pride drowned out the ache. She hugged me, awkwardly at first, then more fully. I wasn't sure you'd come, she admitted. I'll always come when you ask, I said. I meant it. That was when I felt it. Bradley's gaze, sharp, calculating, annoyed. He hadn't planned for this moment. And men like Bradley don't tolerate disruptions to their narrative. The air around us shifted subtly as he began moving toward us, Margaret trailing behind him. Guests leaned in without appearing to. Conversations dulled. The room was preparing for something. Emma didn't notice. Not yet, but I did. And for the first time in 7 years, I understood something with absolute clarity. I wasn't walking into a celebration. I was walking into a confrontation Bradley had been waiting for. And I had a sinking feeling that Emma, my daughter, was about to become collateral damage in a war she didn't even know existed. Bradley didn't raise his voice when he reached us. He didn't need to. Power doesn't shout. It assumes. Emma, he said warmly, already stepping between us, his hand settling possessively at the small of her back. The Hendersons are asking for you. They're dying to congratulate you properly. His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Emma hesitated, glancing at me. Dad, I'll borrow her for a moment, Bradley said, turning just enough to block her view of me. Family business. I felt it then, the deliberate positioning. His body angled to separate. His smile designed for witnesses, not truth. I'd like a moment with my daughter, I said evenly. Bradley turned slowly, his expression cooling. I don't recall approving that. A few heads nearby turned. Champagne glasses paused midair. My name was on the guest list, I replied, right under Mother of the Bride. His smile thinned. A clerical oversight. Margaret finally spoke, her voice tight. Jane, please, don't do this here. Do what? I asked calmly. Stand next to my own child? Bradley leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to feel intimate, threatening. You've made your appearance. That should be enough. Emma stiffened. Bradley, stop. He ignored her. You think you can walk back in here after 7 years and pretend you belong? He murmured. This is my family now. The word my landed like a slap. I'm still her mother, I said. The cruelty was deliberate, calculated. Emma's face drained of color. That's not fair, she whispered. Bradley turned on her instantly, his tone switching back to paternal authority. Sweetheart, let us handle this. You don't need stress tonight. That was when I saw it. The fear. Not in Bradley. In Emma. Fear of upsetting him. Fear of disrupting the balance he controlled. Something inside me shifted. I came to congratulate my daughter, I said clearly, letting my voice carry. Not to be dismissed, like a stain you forgot to scrub away. Bradley laughed softly, always dramatic. That's why she left. He gestured vaguely toward me. That's why she chose stability instead. The room went very quiet. I didn't react. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. You're nothing here, he continued, emboldened by my stillness. A footnote. A woman Emma outgrew. I looked at my daughter then. Her eyes were wide, wet, conflicted, and I understood something devastating in that moment. Bradley hadn't just replaced me. He had rewritten me. "I'd like to speak with Emma privately," I said. "That's not happening," Bradley snapped, stepping fully into my path. "She doesn't want to hear from you." "That's not true," Emma said, finding her voice at last. Bradley didn't even look at her. "Stay where you are." That was the moment he crossed the line. Not with me. With her. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. "If you'll excuse me," I said calmly. I walked away as whispers bloomed behind me, dialing a number I'd hoped never to use again. "It's me," I said softly when the call connected. "Execute protocol severance. Full spectrum." I hung up. And left. I didn't look back, because some fires, once lit, don't need witnesses. I didn't feel triumphant when I stepped outside. I didn't feel powerful. I felt hollow. The night air was cool against my skin as I crossed the long marble foyer toward the exit, the echo of the ballroom still ringing in my ears, laughter resuming, music swelling, life continuing as if nothing irreversible had just happened. That's what hurt the most. How easily the world keeps moving while something inside you fractures. "Jane, wait." Margaret's heels clicked sharply as she hurried after me, her voice tight with something that sounded like panic. "That was unnecessary," she said the moment she reached me. "Bradley gets protective, you know that." I stopped and turned to her slowly. "Does he protect you the same way?" I asked. She flinched. "What is that supposed to mean?" she snapped, defensive already. "You know exactly what it means." For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not embarrassment, not irritation, fear. "Was it worth it?" I asked quietly. "Trading a 20-year marriage for a gilded cage?" "I'm happy," she insisted. The words rang empty in the cavernous space between us. "If you say so." I turned to leave. Her voice followed me, sharp now. "What was that phone call about?" I paused at the door, my hand resting on the cold metal. "Just catching up with an old colleague." I didn't wait for her reply. I drove away without knowing, couldn't have known, that inside the ballroom, the first crack had already turned into a fault line. Richard Harrison, Tyler's father, stood near the bar, his face drained of color as he spoke urgently into his phone. His voice rose despite himself. "That's impossible. She's a security consultant from Albany." Tyler stood frozen beside him, confusion shifting rapidly into disbelief. Bradley approached them with his usual ease, champagne in hand. "Richard," he said smoothly, "about that investment." "Stay away from my son," Richard cut in coldly. "And my company." Bradley blinked, genuinely startled. The room hushed. Tyler turned slowly toward Emma. "Who is your mother?" he asked quietly. Emma frowned. "Jane Carson, you know that." "That's not who she is," he said, his voice strained. "Not entirely." He reached into his pocket, removed the engagement ring, and placed it carefully on the table between them. "I can't do this," he said. "You didn't tell me who she really was." Emma stared at the ring like it was an accusation. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "What did she do?" Tyler didn't answer. He followed his father out of the room without looking back. And just like that, my daughter's future collapsed under the weight of secrets she never asked to carry. 3 days later, I sat in a vinyl booth at a roadside diner, stirring coffee I had no intention of drinking. Marcus slid in across from me, his face pale. "When you said contingency," he murmured, "I didn't think you meant blowing up your daughter's engagement." "I didn't intend to," I said honestly. Bradley forced my hand. "You revealed yourself to Richard Harrison," he said. "Do you realize the risk?" "I do." Marcus leaned closer. "You've been Jane Carson for 15 years. Your old identity was buried for a reason." "I know." "What about Emma?" he asked quietly. The question cracked something open in me. "She'll hate me," I said. But she was already taught to fear me. Marcus shook his head. "You're trading her love for justice." I stared down at the table, my reflection warped in the scratched surface. "Some truths cost more than silence," I said, and I wasn't sure anymore which price hurt more. Bradley's world didn't collapse all at once. It compressed, like a building under controlled demolition. Supports removed quietly, Pressure redistributed until the structure began to groan under its own weight. I watched it unfold from my small apartment, the same way I'd once watched markets react to whispers, not headlines. The first call came the morning after the party. Bradley's voice echoed through the recording Marcus forwarded me. Tight, sharp, already cracking. What do you mean they're pulling out? We signed last quarter. The reply from the other end was calm, professional, final. By noon, 2 more investors had requested emergency audits. By evening, Margaret's credit card was declined at a boutique she'd frequented for years. She called Bradley in tears. He told her it was a temporary glitch. It wasn't. Inside Thompson Properties, panic spread quietly. Assistants whispered. Executives stopped making eye contact. Emails went unanswered. Bradley called his partner, Lawrence Chen, demanding explanations. Lawrence brought him a folder instead. Inside were bank statements, transfers to offshore accounts, signatures perfectly matched, patterns undeniable. These came to my house, Lawrence said carefully. Anonymous. Bradley's face went gray. They're fake, he snapped. Someone's framing me. Lawrence studied him for a long moment. Then someone knows you very well. Meanwhile, Emma stopped calling me. She didn't answer my messages. Instead, she went to her mother. Margaret told her I was manipulating powerful people, that I'd sabotaged her happiness out of spite, that I was dangerous. Emma wanted to believe her. It was easier than believing the man she trusted most had been lying to her for years. Bradley hired a private investigator. That was a mistake. Because when you look for the truth without knowing how deep it goes, you don't get answers. You get warnings. The investigator found just enough. Mentions of a woman called the architect. Rumors of corporate collapses with no fingerprints. A name buried under sealed records. Not proof. Fear. When the investigator called Bradley, his voice shook. Whatever you did to her, he said, undo it. Now. Bradley laughed it off. He always believed money insulated him from consequences. Then the charity gala happened. A harmless event. Familiar faces. Controlled environment. Until the sound system crackled, and Bradley's voice filled the room, mocking his investors, calling them parasites, laughing about how easy it was to move money where regulators would never look. Margaret watched from the front row as people slowly turned away from them, one by one. Phones came out. Faces hardened. The damage was immediate and irreversible. By morning, the SEC announced a formal investigation. Lawrence turned state's evidence to save himself. Accounts were frozen, properties seized, friends vanished. Bradley went from untouchable to toxic in less than a week. And still, the hardest part wasn't watching him fall. It was knowing Emma was watching too. And she had no idea which version of her life had been real. The night Emma finally came to see me, I knew before she even spoke that something inside her had broken. I was sitting alone in my apartment, lights off except for the glow of the city leaking through the window. I hadn't turned on the television. I hadn't touched my phone. I'd learned long ago that when the noise stops, the truth gets louder. The knock at the door was hesitant, careful, like she wasn't sure she was welcome. When I opened it, she stood there rigid, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes red but dry, not crying anymore, past that stage. I remembered this place, she said flatly. You used to bring me here after school when you were working late. I stepped aside without a word. She didn't sit down at first. She paced. 3 steps one way, 3 back, like a caged animal searching for a corner that didn't exist. Tyler won't talk to me, she said finally. His father hired security. They won't even let me onto the property. I stayed silent. You know what people are saying about Bradley? She continued, her voice sharp now. About Mom? About you? I nodded once. Her hands began to shake. What did you do? I closed my eyes. Because this moment was always going to be the real cost. I made a phone call, I said quietly. That's not an answer, she snapped. You destroyed my engagement. You humiliated us. You turned everyone against my family. Bradley did that, I replied calmly. I only stopped protecting him. She laughed bitterly. Protecting him? You weren't even there. That one landed. I stayed away because you asked me to, I said. Because you believed I was dangerous. She froze. Mom said, I know what your mother said. Emma's voice broke. Then tell me the truth, right now. Who are you really? I looked at her then. Truly looked. At the woman she'd become in a world that trained her to trade safety for silence. And I knew I couldn't give her the truth she wanted. Not yet. Not here, I said. Not tonight. Her face hardened. 7 years, she whispered. 7 years of barely speaking to you. And now you won't even explain yourself. This isn't about punishment, I said. It's about consequences. For who? She demanded. You or me? I had no answer that wouldn't wound her deeper. So that's it, she said, stepping back toward the door. You blow up my life, refuse to explain, and expect me to understand someday? I expect you to survive, I said, even if it means hating me. Tears finally spilled over. I chose them, she said quietly. I chose Mom. I chose Bradley. I know, I replied. And you let me, she said. Yes. She stared at me like she'd never seen me before. Stay away from me, she said. From all of us. Then she left. The door closed softly behind her. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence settle back into place. This was the part no one talks about. Not the revenge, not the justice, the emptiness afterward. The knowledge that even when you're right, you don't always win. My phone vibrated. Phase 2 ready. Awaiting confirmation. I stared at the message, and for the first time in years, I hesitated, because the man I was about to finish destroying deserved it. But the daughter I had already lost might never come back. I typed one word, begin, and accepted that some bridges, once burned, leave scars on both sides of the river. The turning point didn't arrive with a scream or a revelation. It came quietly. The way truth often does, after the damage is already done. 3 days after Emma walked out of my apartment, Marcus called me just after sunrise. They found it, he said without preamble. Found what? I asked, already sitting up. The missing ledger, he replied. The one Bradley swore never existed. I closed my eyes. That ledger had been the keystone, the proof that turned suspicion into certainty. It documented years of layered fraud, shell companies feeding offshore accounts, falsified valuations, political favors disguised as philanthropy. Bradley had always believed it was gone. He was wrong. Victor's team had located it buried inside a redundant server cluster, hidden so deeply Bradley himself had likely forgotten where it was stored. They didn't hack it, they waited. And when Bradley panicked, he accessed it himself. That was the mistake. By noon, federal agents were moving. By evening, subpoenas were issued to every executive tied to Thompson Properties. Bradley tried to call me. I didn't answer. Margaret tried next. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was frantic, breathless, stripped of polish. Jane, please, whatever this is, we can fix it. He's under a lot of stress. You don't understand how complicated this is. I deleted it without responding. For years, I had absorbed blame that wasn't mine. I had softened truths so others could sleep at night. I was done doing that. That night, Lawrence Chen resigned publicly and accepted a plea deal. His statement was brief, controlled. He named Bradley explicitly. The press devoured it. And for the first time, the narrative shifted. Not rumors, not allegations, facts. Evidence. Paper trails. Bradley's lawyers scrambled. His accounts froze. His properties were seized pending investigation. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered. Power doesn't vanish dramatically. It evaporates. I visited the Thompson mansion once more. Not to gloat, not to threaten, just to end it. Bradley sat alone in the living room, surrounded by empty bottles and drawn curtains. The house felt smaller somehow, like it was already letting go of him. How did you do it? He asked hoarsely. All of it. I stood across from him, hands relaxed at my sides. I watched, I said, for 7 years. He laughed weakly. All because I embarrassed you at a party? I shook my head. Because you stole my family. Because you taught my daughter to fear me. Because you thought silence meant weakness. He stared at me then, not as an adversary, but as a woman he had fundamentally misunderstood. What do you want? He asked. One thing, I replied. You confess, fully. You leave Margaret out of it. He hesitated. You do this, I continued, and you serve time for what you actually did. You don't, and everything comes out. He understood. He confessed the next morning. And just like that, the war was over. Not with victory, but with finality. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It rippled outward, slow and relentless, touching everything Bradley had ever claimed as his own. The headlines came first. Not sensational at first, measured, cautious. Federal investigation launched into Thompson Properties. Then sharper. CEO confesses to financial fraud. Then brutal. Bradley Thompson faces multiple felony counts. The man who once commanded rooms now existed only as a name people lowered their voices to mention. His partners vanished. His allies distanced themselves publicly. Statements were released, photos deleted, donations quietly returned. The same social circle that once orbited him now acted as if proximity alone might contaminate them. Margaret felt the collapse in more intimate ways. Her cards stopped working entirely. Vendors she'd known for years demanded payment up front. Friends stopped answering messages. Invitations evaporated. The mansion, once a symbol of arrival, became a liability, then a burden, then a silent accusation she couldn't escape. She came to see me 3 weeks after Bradley's confession. She looked smaller, not physically, emotionally. I made a terrible mistake, she said, sitting across from me, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I thought security meant love. I thought stability meant silence. I listened. I always did. We could start over, she added softly. We had something real once. 7 years ago, those words would have undone me. Now they landed without impact. You're not here because you love me, I said gently. You're here because the world you chose rejected you. Tears filled her eyes. There is no us anymore, I continued, and there never will be again. I helped her stand, walked her to the door, closed it quietly behind her. Emma didn't come to see me right away. She moved cities, took a new job, changed her number. I heard about her through Marcus, through fragments. She was trying to rebuild without choosing sides, trying to exist outside the wreckage. Months later, she asked to meet me. We sat by the waterfront where I'd taught her to skip stones as a child. The same bench, the same wind. Is there any chance for us? She asked, tears sliding freely now. Can we fix this? I wanted to say yes. Every part of me did. But love doesn't erase choices. You believed the worst about me for 7 years, I said quietly. That wasn't one decision. It was many. She nodded, swallowing hard. This isn't about forgiveness, I continued. It's about recognition. Some damage changes things permanently. She cried. I stood, and I walked away. Bradley was sentenced months later, 6 years, possibly less with good behavior. His empire was dismantled, assets seized, legacy reduced to cautionary footnotes. People like to imagine revenge as explosive. It isn't. Real revenge is cold. It's watching someone face the consequences they were always meant to face, without interference, without mercy, without spectacle. It's not hatred, it's clarity. Life doesn't reset after destruction. It settles, quietly, unevenly, with scars that never fully fade. I still live in the same modest apartment. I still work under my real name now. No disguises, no performances. Jane Carson is no longer a role I play to survive. She is simply who I am. Bradley Thompson serves his sentence. Margaret rebuilds from nothing, learning for the first time what it means to stand without borrowed power. Emma lives in another city now, far from the echoes of a family that fractured under the weight of lies. We don't speak, and I've learned to live with that. People ask if it was worth it. if justice justified the cost, if I would do it again knowing I would lose my daughter in the process. I don't give them the answer they want because the truth is complicated. I didn't act out of rage. I didn't act out of jealousy. I acted because silence had become a weapon used against me and against my child. I let myself be erased for 7 years to protect her. And when that erasure became a tool to control her, I stopped cooperating. Revenge isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It doesn't gloat. Real revenge is watching someone realize, too late, that the person they dismissed was the one holding the leverage all along. Sometimes when I drive past the old Thompson mansion, it sits dark and empty, a for sale sign tilting in the yard like a head bowed in shame. A monument to hubris and consequence. I don't know if what I did was right. I only know this. They took my family. They rewrote my story. They expected me to disappear quietly. They were wrong. And the woman they underestimated showed them exactly who she had always been.